Hi, it's another edition of Wisdom Walks, and today we're going to talk about the power of free will. Seems to be coming up a lot for a lot of people these days, and I want to speak to it. How can we deepen our relationship with the power of our free will? That's what we're going to check out today. All right, so this idea of speaking about the power of free will came up because I have a lot of people that are feeling like they're really stuck and they feel like they have no choice. Have you ever felt that way? Where you feel like, I don't really have a choice here. And I'm here to remind you, you always have a choice. That there are oftentimes many, many more pathways than you even realize in terms of being able to choose differently. Okay, I want to give you guys a little bit of a story. You know, I like my stories about how the ego can hijack us and make us believe that we don't have a choice. And this particular story was very impactful for me because it made me realize how much my ego mind could come in and tell me a story and convince me that things looked a certain way or they were a certain way when they weren't that way at all. Can you guys relate to that? Have you had a time in your life where you thought something looked a certain way only to realize it wasn't actually that way? Let me share this story. So I have a health management and administration degree that I took in my 20s, and it took me about almost 10 years to do this degree because I was working full-time and raising family and that sort of thing. And I was writing my very last test for my very last class to get my degree. You know that feeling when you're just coming to the very end of the line. It's so exciting and you just want to get it done. You just want to get across that finish line. So I was writing this test and I was having a great deal of anxiety because the class right before, the course I had taken right before my last one, I had failed a final exam. For the first time ever, I failed a test and I was devastated. And so even though I rewrote it and passed it, it was still playing in my mind as I'm writing this final exam. And so my ego starts piping up and it starts saying, oh my gosh, you're not getting any of the answers right. You're doing horrible. You're failing this. And that kept playing in my mind as I'm writing this test. So I finally make it through the test and I am not feeling good about it. Like I get to my car and I break down and I bawl. I am so convinced that I have failed this exam miserably. Like miserably. Didn't know any of the answers. So I get to the car, I'm bawling, I'm feeling like, okay, I failed. I called my partner. I said, oh my gosh, like I failed this exam. I'm so disappointed. I'm going to have to do another rewrite. It's like the worst thing ever. I'm right at the finish line, but not. And I'm so worked up. By the time I get home, I decide to email my prof in the class. So I emailed the prof. I said, I bombed this test and I'm so nervous about it. I know I'm going to have to rewrite it. So I'd rather just start preparing now. Can you let me know? And it was an Easter weekend. The prof did not even have to look at this test. But they were like an angel for me that day. And they sent me a message back. They said, I don't know whose test you thought you wrote, but you got 87%. You guys, I had convinced myself that I had miserably failed this test. And yet I had passed with flying colors. I was so convinced that I had to do a rewrite. I had played this story and I was so convinced that I had failed. And what a wonderful story to be able to really showcase how the ego mind wants to hijack us and make us believe all sorts of things that are not even true. And I'm inviting you to think about some things in your life right now where maybe you're believing something and maybe it's not even true. Maybe the ego is telling you some stories. And so this goes back to the power of free will, because what happens is the ego mind, the false self, call it lots of different things, it begins to take over, and it takes little snippets of little stories, and then it makes up the rest of the story. So because I had failed in the previous class and had to do a rewrite, it went straight to, oh my God, panic mode, you're gonna fail and you'll have to do a rewrite in this class as well, right? So what happens is it takes away our sense of free will, because we believe that things need to be a certain way. We believe that the things that have happened in the past are shaping the future, and that's not necessarily true. And so then we get stuck in this space of feeling like we don't have a choice in life, in how we're feeling, in the decisions we make, whatever that might be. So here's the invitation. And I know I've talked about this before, but it just bears repeating, because what has happened over thousands of years is the ego that was meant to keep us alive and safe. You know, back in the cave people days, that ego would tell us when there's predators, tell us when there's danger, so we could stay alive. But over thousands of years, the ego mind has expanded, and it's seeped into every crevice within us. And so it's hijacked us. And the ego is not bad. I'm not saying the ego is the worst thing ever. The ego has great power for us, and the ego can help us to take action in this world. The ego helps us to live in this three-dimensional, beautiful world that we live in. And so rather than rejecting the ego, we can begin to build a relationship with it. And one of the first things I tell my clients is a simple tool. When the ego comes in and it's negative and it's saying, you can't do that, who are you, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever that is, you can say, thank you, ego, but I've got this. Thank you, but I've got this. And even that alone will help the ego to slowly step aside and to give you a little bit of breathing room so that you can lean into the desires of your heart and make decisions that are in most harmonious alignment for you. But even more than this, there's an opportunity to recognize that it is the higher self mind, the God mind within us, that actually is there to help us to make the most aligned, spirited decisions possible. So people ask me all the time, they say, well, why am I so miserable? I'm so miserable all the time. I'm doing everything right. I'm trying so hard. It's because you're letting the ego still run the show. And one of the best techniques is to build relationship to the ego self and to the higher mind. So how do we do that? Well, we can begin by recognizing that we can be the witness of ourselves, that we are multidimensional beings, and we can be the witness of that ego, the witness of the higher mind. And in doing so, we start to be able to differentiate or discern, okay, this is coming from my ego versus this is coming from my high mind, right? And when we can get into that discernment piece, then we can more easily get that ego to step aside. Thanks, ego, but I've got this. And we can lean in more to that higher mind, that higher self. One of the techniques I love to share with clients around this, give your ego mind a name. Give it a name, right? This helps you to separate yourself from that ego. My ego, her name is Jane. I had a student in class the other day, and I loved her name so much. She called her ego mind Ivana Gripe-a-Lot. Isn't that hilarious? I've got a friend who calls hers the itty bitty shitty committee. You can call it whatever you like. But the point being is that we want to embrace this relationship. We want to befriend the ego. The same thing applies to the higher self or the higher mind. Give that a name too. Give that a name too. And so, this is an opportunity for you to deepen this relationship within yourself so that you have more power in your free will. It was one of the greatest gifts that we have been given. And yet, so often we are not utilizing it to its potential. And we're allowing ourselves to believe that we're stuck in situations that we have to make these forced decisions, not realizing that there is other potential and other possibility. So I want to share this with you because We have so much power in our choosing. This is a choose your own adventure. And in fact, this can go deeper into choosing our thoughts, choosing our feelings, right? When we think different thoughts, we have different feelings, okay? If I believe that I am struggling, if I believe I'm struggling and I speak that into the world and I say, oh, I'm struggling so much, okay, we might actually be struggling, but what if there's a different perspective? What if we can reframe that? What if we can connect with that ego mind and say, okay, ego, I recognize that you perceive this as struggling, but what am I getting out of it here? And what are the other potential pathways that I could lean into that would allow me to move forward in a different way with maybe a different perspective? So I could go on and on for hours on this topic, but my hope for you is that you feel inspired to make some different choices, to recognize that it is not necessarily a this or that, but it could be a this and that impossibility, or that there are way more possibilities than you think are available to you in your decision. This is so powerful, you guys, because ultimately we are the designers. Remember, we are the co-authors here in our world. We have this incredible opportunity to write our story. And yet, so many of us let the story just unfold, and then we feel some sense of disappointment or discouragement or frustration, whatever that is, because we haven't been participating completely in the design of our lives. So reminding you, you have the power of free will. Reminding you to let that ego serve you, and you tell the ego what to do. Okay, you become the boss of the ego, and just watch how your life changes. Okay, my marketing companions tell me I got to talk about this book here. This is the book that I've been working on for almost 2 decades. It's The Ark, and although it's based on my real life events, it takes a fictional approach and a wonderful, fantastical story. And this book is now available on Amazon, so that link is going to be available for you guys if you feel compelled to read a story of inspiration, a story of remembrance. My wish for people is that when they read this book, they're going to start to remember more of who they are. And just by reading the book, they're going to tap into their inner magic. And so when they're done the book, they're going to feel something has shifted inside of them. This book, by the way, was channeled. So I wrote the whole entire book over the span of about 20 years. It took me a while. And then I had a student in my class, my intuition class. She was so special. And she used to be a copywriter, a ghostwriter. She's written countless books. And something said, reach out to this woman. Her name is Darlene Butts. I got to give a shout out to her because she was my partner in this. And we telepathically channeled and completed this book together. So what a gift. What a beautiful, magical experience. So this book, pure magic. Okay, I can say that because I didn't do it all by myself. God, divine, pitched in a big way for this book, as well as Darlene, just coming across my path. Interesting, she had quit writing, actually. So anyway, super excited about it. It was a special project. We're already working on book number 2. So this is a trilogy, and the intention is going to be a movie someday. So if you feel called at all, click on that Amazon link and give yourself a wonderful gift. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.